About 2 years ago now, almost exactly, my husband and I decided that we got a flyer for an Antarctic trip for some alumni organization, and it was a Christmas, New Year's sort of thing. We decided that maybe it wasn't such a great idea to go at Christmas time if I was really more interested in the birds. So we decided that we should go during the earliest part of the season possible. The earliest departures are in October. And that's how this trip started, which we launched in October 2019. Now, the previous month, I had been in New Zealand. John Mercer remembers following my eBird lists around part of the South Island. So here I am just getting prepped to head towards Antarctica in September of 2019. Tonight's topics are: why do people go to the Antarctic region? Why are these places so special? Why did I choose the particular outfit and itinerary that I did? And what did we see? There's so much to talk about. It was hard to edit down my pictures. At first, I thought it would be hard to fill the time, but not now. So, why do tourists visit the Antarctic region? It's about the seventh continent, it's about the ice, it's about the wildlife, and it's about the history. And finally, it's about the adventure of an expedition to a true wilderness, but for birders, of course, it's all about the wind. So why are these places so special? There's geography and geology that's special. Most of the area is true wilderness with very little human impact, except maybe for microplastics floating around the ocean and in the guts of wildlife. The oceanography and meteorology inform the planet's climate. The temperatures and winds are extreme. And of course, the flora and fauna are unique. But why did I choose G Adventures? It's a small boat. The scientists, both the team of experts we had and the sponsored ones on board, as I said, one of the earliest departures, and an excellent reputation. So what is there to see? Rocks, ice of various kinds, water and clouds, marine life, and birds. This was life on ship during passages, lectures and films, workshops. We had a lounge, we had a bar. There was a tiny fitness room, which I never went in. I'd rather do deck walking myself because that went along with sea watching. So here we are. Why do people visit? Let's go into more detail. Here's a map of the globe, the world. You will notice Antarctica is off the map. For me, it was in fact my seventh continent, and I was very excited about that. I talked about the ice. It comes in many forms. There are amazing glaciers on both South Georgia and other sub-Antarctic islands and on the continent itself. The ice comes in many forms. This one it's my top right, I hope it's your top right. These amazing undulations are the result of ice action, wave action on the ice. That iceberg is actually settled on the seafloor. And as the tide goes up and down and the various storms come along, we see the effect of all that. We see the birds who fly and make use of that ice. And we even got into the pack ice. Here's some of the wildlife. I can't tell you how surprised I was the day I was on the bridge and some penguins went flying by. I turned to the first officer and said, "Penguins?" And all he could say was, "Well, they are seabirds." We saw a few whales, even though October, November is not the best time for whale watching. I was in a kayak here on the lower right when I got charged by an elephant seal. A very scary moment. I was afraid I was going to get tipped over by the elephant seal. On the kayak also, we could get up close and personal. And believe it or not, here on the bottom left, that is penguin poop. Because they eat a lot of crustaceans, the poop is pink, which means it's another good reason to go early in the year because there's less penguin excrement on the beaches. There's history when you visit the Falklands and South Georgia. Here is a very beautiful beach just outside Stanley Falkland Islands. And unfortunately, which is great for wildlife, but unfortunately, it is still mined. The Falkland Islands was heavily mined by the invading Argentines, although they might call them the liberators of the Malvinas. I heard a lot of that, and many people on the Falklands do speak Spanish. It's a bilingual kind of place. The government of South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands, the government of the Falkland Islands brings in expert teams of people who do demining, and they're mostly from Africa because those are the people who have the most experience and the largest population, largest trained population of people who can remove mines. Every year, there are public notices of which fields, pastures, beaches, and so on are now declared mine-free. They're also using some dogs for explosives disposal, and even getting into training rats for that sort of thing, which is a very tender subject in some of these islands because, of course, rats can be part of the pest problem, eating eggs of the seabirds who come to land for nest, who must come to land to nest. And Grytviken, which is the remaining whaling station, historic whaling station, of course, no longer active on South Georgia, there's a lot of history. The site is preserved almost as if it were a Williamsburg of, on our experience, colonial history. In this place, it's one of the few locations where whaling history is interpreted in a meaningful way. And as you walk around, there are these interpretive signs. Here on the bottom right is some of the remaining machinery, which is being preserved so that when cruise ships do come in to visit, because that's pretty much the only way to get there, they are happy to interpret for you. And of course, for fans of Shackleton, South Georgia is where Shackleton is buried. And it's a tradition to visit the graveyard and drink a toast of Jameson's over Shackleton's grave. Let's see, here we go. Of course, it is a wilderness. And so you don't have to be as adventurous as I was to be on a kayak up close and personal with ice. This one on the right hand, in the lower right hand corner, we might have been coming in for a bitty bit of iceberg to take back to the ship for cocktails and margarita type things, which they were very happy to grind up for us. But in the center, you see the little Zodiac being launched off our very little boat. And here we are trekking in a very lonely landscape on the left. After we'd landed, we needed to get up over a ridge to see the penguin colony at that particular place. And of course, we are happy to see the birds. One of the reasons to go on a ship to these places is just to have flocks and flocks of seabirds. Now, these in particular are mostly pintado or Cape petrels, which you can see from the South Island of New Zealand. And I've never been to Cape Town, but I imagine you could probably see them from Cape Town as well. But you can also see giant petrels and other seabirds. I'm not sure I've got the right ID on this other one on the top right, but here on the bottom left, we have striated caracara, we have South Georgia pintail, and the another South Georgia bird whose name is escaping me at the moment, but we're going to come back to that little bird. Okay. So let's talk about why these places are so special. Or maybe I should pause. Donna, have we had any questions yet?
Nope, not yet.
Not yet. Okay. What does make these places so special? Geography and geology, oceanography, temperature and winds, wilderness, flora and fauna. Okay. Here is a map of the seafloor from the NOAA Digital Atlas. And you can see in the top right corner that the Falkland Islands are really part of the South American continental shelf. It doesn't really get very deep. But what does happen is you're traveling in these regions as the Antarctic Peninsula curves and makes its tip, the circumpolar current cannot make that bend as tightly. So the polar current actually goes between the Falkland Islands and South Georgia, where I'm circling with my cursor. I hope you can see that, which means South Georgia is part of the subpolar region, and icebergs abound and the sea temperature declines and there's fog and a lot of other things that you would expect to see closer to Antarctica. Here's a color picture from a different direction. The pale blue really highlights how the Falkland Islands are part of the South American continent and this big passage. So you get cold, very cold water sweeping to the top left here around South Georgia, along with this other current between it and the peninsula. Here's a graphic that shows you how the Southern Ocean runs around, and again, how it goes between the Falklands and South Georgia. This gives you an idea of where this outer dark line is the sub-Antarctic front. This inner blue line is the polar front. And then these are the seasonal extension of the sea ice. So in September, we were barely able, since we were there in, I think we hit the Antarctic Peninsula November 1st, we were just able to get here to the very tip. If you choose to visit Antarctica later in the season, Christmas time, you'll really be able to get along the peninsula into the Weddell Sea. Now, here we are. Why are these places so windy? Of course, you have the Coriolis effect, the turn of the earth driving the different circulation patterns. And here, this green band, you can see the roaring Forties. New Zealand, well within the roaring Forties over here on the extreme right. Patagonia, much of Patagonia, roaring Forties. But then by the time you're at the Falklands, you're into the furious 50s and of course, the screaming 60s. Those winds are what the seabirds love. This happens to be a shot I took of our daily briefing when we had a storm coming through. I believe this might be Elephant Island. And over here on the left side, not center left, you can see that the winds are getting up towards 40 miles an hour. So we actually kind of made a detour to scoot in undercover here along the west side of the Antarctic Peninsula. It was very interesting how they gave us a daily briefing, which is what defined it as an expedition, because we could not have set ports of call. There are, oh, I know, these are the South Shetlands. We were not able to get into the South Shetlands because of this storm incoming. So we had to duck and run for the west side of the Antarctic Peninsula. So here we are, more shots of the wilderness. Looks a lot like the high Arctic when you get into these big marshy basins. You might think that's Alaska, but here's a Argentine research station. The staff, seasonal staff, hadn't even gotten in there, and that's the kind of barn thing that they're going to be living in for the research season. And this little island here actually is at the eastern end of the Antarctic Strait. That is the Weddell Sea beyond it, and we could not get in because of this pack ice. We were hoping some of the winds from that storm would have blown the pack ice a little farther east, but we were stopped dead that day. Now, of course, there's unique flora and fauna. Some of you might remember this little plant if you've been to the South Island of New Zealand, and because of the cold currents up the west coast of South America, you can find it as far north as Ecuador. But the sea botanicals around South Georgia, the phytoplankton community, is the basis of this entire marine food chain of the Southern Ocean, which gave rise to the great whales and still feeds so much sea life. And expeditions are still going on. I snagged this photo, which was just taken a few weeks ago. There was an expedition last month, and new species are still being photographed, and they'll be taken home and described, and they're pretty sure that they've got a whole bunch of new endemic seaweeds and sponges, which I just find to be a staggering revelation. So why did I choose G Adventures? This is me and my daughter, Heidi, in front of our little, what we called we are expedition members called the Little Red Boat. And you can see that this looks nothing like a carnival ship. There were not even 1,000, nowhere near 1,000 people. The passengers were a little over 100. And I think altogether we might have been around 135 or 140 people on that boat. For those of you who are following Antarctic voyages, some of the bigger ship companies are trying to get into Antarctica, but the International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators is going very slowly on that. They have required that larger ships convert from bunker fuel, pardon me, bunker fuel, heavy bunker fuel, very polluting, to very high grade gasoline, which is part of what makes going to Antarctica so expensive on these ships. And another important element is that small boats can help rescue each other. And later on, you'll see pictures of our lounge and our dining space. And we could probably just barely pick up the members of another ship, small ship, if they were to get into trouble. But a large ship would be in a lot more trouble because there won't be anyone big enough to take on passengers from a very large ship. We had, as I mentioned, we had scientists, the timing, and its reputation. So these are just some examples of why it felt like a small ship. This is you can see here at the long distance shot, this is not a passenger ship with 7 tiers that kind of looks like a floating super tanker. This is a very small ship. Here in the center top, those are some of our Zodiacs, but right here along the side of the stack is my walking track. It took 8 laps to do a mile, and I would try to do 16 laps every day because I would rather be walking outside looking for birds than inside our tiny fitness center. This rig here alongside this stack is actually one of our landing platforms. You can see how small the bow is, and some of you who've done cruising may recall that you're not allowed on most ships to get out on the bow, but at G Adventures, we had the run of the ship except the bridge or the engine room or the staff quarters. But the bridge was especially important unless there was a pilot aboard or we were in other hazardous conditions. And here's the active deployment of our Zodiacs, which took a good hour and a half to get all the boats deployed. When we went ashore, we had 4 different boarding groups named for the different penguin species, and some people were already on the way back by the time the last group was on its way out, but that rotated with every landing. So you never felt like you were always last. Here's some of our interior spaces. Here in the top left, there's Heidi again. This is my birding buddy, Eugene, from Brunswick, Georgia. He and I spent many hours together on the bridge, enough to raise eyebrows so that Heidi had to assure people I was happily married. Some of you have met my husband. This is a side view of our lounge. I think we were coming into the Falkland Islands. This was an early morning, and there was a large series of offshore rocks that we were all trying to get a glimpse of through very foggy conditions. The center picture, it was originally supposed to be my husband and me. At the last minute, he could not make it, which is why Heidi joined us. And because my husband booked it, we had a very comfortable cabin with our own sitting area where we were happy to host cocktail parties in the midst of the pandemic. It's a very refreshing photo to think about hosting a cocktail party in a small space, I think. This is another shot of our lounge. Behind me is our little dais and screen, and to the right, that is the door out to the forecastle. And this funny fellow in the monkey eating eagles t-shirt is a member of our house band. Many of our staff were or are Filipino, and the monkey eating eagle, of course, is now known as the Great Philippine Eagle, an endangered species. But this was the house band made of our crew members, had tour shirts made up, and they sold them on board. This was the Antarctica tour 2019-2020, because they were on a course for the whole season. Now, we were very lucky to have a team of experts accompanying us. This fellow here went by the name of Scobie. I hesitate to think that this is what Luke Jacobs would look like another decade or so hence, but this guy spent 40 years with the British Antarctic Survey and was an endless fountain of anecdotes and tales of antics in the depths of the polar winter, or other research trips, or even building some of the wonderful but very basic tourist amenities such as boardwalks that kept us from eroding the turf with our little tourist feet on very precious seabird islands. Many of our staff did double duty. So Scobie was in fact in charge of Zodiac maintenance and the general oversight of Zodiac operations. So if engines, I think the whole trip, only one engine conked out one time, and it had to be towed back to the ship. So I think, considering how many trips they were running, that was an excellent effort. This lady here was actually our whale specialist, and she did double duty as one of our tour guides, who were really in charge, of course, safety paramount here as we were doing one of our kayak briefings in the locker room. That is the locker room that we used to gear up to go ashore whenever there was a landing, in addition to being the kayak. So when you came aboard, or when you were leaving, you came dressed to travel, but your muck boots stayed here in the locker room and your little life jackets stayed on. And this is also the room where we performed biosecurity measures in terms of both outbound inspection of, for instance, our boot soles to make sure we were not carrying seeds from one location to another. And then the same thing inbound, we were hosing and scrubbing ourselves off to make sure we were not bringing anything back. So there were two efforts to maintain biosecurity from location to location. And this is our expedition leader, who before every landing would give us a very thorough briefing of the landings, the geography, the geology, what to expect, what the immediate weather forecast was for the immediate area. Now, I mentioned in addition to our team of experts who were very experienced research scientists, we actually had a small team of scientists on board who were part of the collaborative partnership for wildlife research. Our fees helped pay for free bunks for these scientists because of global cutbacks in research budgets. So, and of course, there are huge logistic costs for any Antarctic operations. So these guys, I think our team was all guys, uh, whenever we were ashore, they would come ashore to do their research in whatever time was allotted for these stops. And here you can see one guy doing a drone, getting ready to launch his drone for a beach survey of wildlife, and another fellow taking wildlife shots in order to identify wildlife. So it was a little bit of a privilege, I thought, to be associated with an outfit of this sort. So here's our itinerary. The early austral spring has its pluses, the mating, the blooming, the less animal poop on the beaches. You remember seeing the pink penguin poop, although the weather's a little bit colder. The negative, of course, is that there's more ice. We're not going to see emperor penguins. You cannot, yeah, emperors. We had saw kings, but no emperors. You cannot get far enough into the towards the heart of Antarctica as opposed to the peninsula. And there are fewer whales at that time of year. So those of you who really want to go for whale watching, it's that early departure is not the time to go. And finally, of course, I mentioned that G Adventures has a great reputation for local cultural as well as wildlife support. So G Adventures has a foundation called Planetara, and the Philippines, the monkey eating eagle band was actually part of the, it sounds kind of funny, but in addition to supporting communities in the Falklands and South Georgia and even Ushuaia, where we concluded our trip, the Planetara helped raise money for the monkey eating eagle in the Philippines. These are just some random shots from around deck where you could see we bundled up mostly, but maybe not so much. As I said, we had the run of the ship, so you could be way up high or farther down low. These two guys on the right cracked me up. It was a father and son team, English, but really came for the special photographic opportunities, but they were very good at, they were really fast. And many of you may recall, those of you who've been out with me know that photography is not my favorite thing when out birding. Holly Merker has kind of held my feet to the fire, so I got a camera. I usually count on John Mercer or Luke or even Donna Kiphorn to keep me honest in terms of photography. But these guys would get this great bird picture and come running over and say, "What is it?" They would demand that I identify the bird on the spot, which sometimes I could do, and sometimes I had to pull out the bird guide. This is our whole officer crew in our lounge, and here's another picture of Heidi in the locker room. Sorry for the duplication. Again, here's our bridge, where on any given day we could be having fun, and the Chilean, excuse me, the Argentine research station. Oh, sorry, am I going? Here we go. Let's go on to the birds. Marcelo Flores is a Chilean who was our ornithologist. He has a university appointment in Santiago, and this particular picture was taken on at Grytviken. So of course, seabirds are a very special group of birds. I know many of you, I've asked if you'll come with me to Hatteras to go seabirding, or maybe out of Cape May or even Brooklyn, New York. The sea conditions are generally not so appealing unless you are accustomed to it or have a high tolerance for dramamine or boning. But more than most birds, seabirds live on the wind. They roam far. They could be above, on, or in the water, rather than staying exclusively near coastal areas or islands, which, you know, shags and cormorants are really kind of coastal birds. Even gulls are really more coastal birds. But these seabirds generally only come ashore to nest. This is a giant petrel, giant southern petrel in the middle. I think we have a blue petrel on the left, and of course, storm petrels on the right. Most seabirds have camouflaging drab plumage. They have more feathers relative to their body size for waterproofing and insulation, and wings are specially shaped for their unique flight or swimming needs. Of course, penguins have very special wings, and albatrosses have very special wings. So in addition to seabirds, when you go to this area, you can see special passerines, waders, waterfowl, and the raptors. The two islands, of course, have endemics and as well as resident breeding birds who come in but are not endemic. The Falklands have two endemic species. On the right here, this is the Falkland steamer duck. We did not go to the part of the islands that where the Cobb's wren is found. They actually have about 70 breeding birds, with 20 migrants who come in, not to nest, but who are regular visitors, and about 130 recorded vagrants, which to my mind is an astonishing number considering that you're a couple of days of ship time offshore. So welcome to the Falklands. Here we are. On the left, this is West Island. It's a sheep station. It has been colonized for sheep herding for a very long time, centuries. This yellow flower, those of you who've been to the UK and Scotland will recognize as gorse, very heavily invasive woody shrub. And these stands of pines are actually Monterey pine from the west coast of North America, the Monterey pine in Monterey, California. Here on the right is a view of the city of Stanley, Falkland Islands, the city that was invaded, the largest population center on the islands. And there's a very narrow passage to get in. We were bussed out to take a walk around this headland and do some birding. So two very different views of the Falklands. But here are some of the little passerines. I think almost all these photos are from West Island. Of course, there's only one family that lives there. Very hospitable. We had tea and biscuits with them at the end of our morning visit after seeing the hiking to the penguin colonies, the Magellanic penguins. They're all labeled. I don't need to read them. Of course, a thrush will look familiar to you. Interesting that this meadowlark is a burrowing kind of bird. And this austral wren sedge-wren is, that was actually taken on that headland near Stanley. There's all sorts of waterfowl, including the crested duck, red-headed goose, and the kelp goose. There were a lot of kelp goose ashore, along with these red-headed goose, which, as you can see, climb upland, and they, I'm sorry I don't have the little movies inserted in this slideshow. There was quite a lot of activity and chasing around among the different goose who were with us on shore. The waders, of course, on the left, this is a blackish oyster catcher. You'll recognize the oyster catcher. There is no white on this bird, but it's actually a little bit brownish, so they call it a blackish oyster catcher. And here on the right, we were very lucky to be in at West Island at low tide. Well, I thought we were lucky because the waders were out. I'm not sure the Zodiac people were so happy about being there at low tide, but this is a Magellanic oyster catcher. And they're raptors. This person on the left will look very familiar. I was astonished to see something so familiar as I came ashore, but there you go. Turkey vultures are very common. I think that photo was taken over at Stanley, where there's headlands where you also have black-crowned night herons nesting, somehow found their way to the Falklands. But this guy is a local, a striated caracara, and you can see the bands. You know, I'm not sure I ever checked in on that band. I might have to. I'm still getting follow-ups from eBird data reviewers on some of my sightings, because I've actually only just started posting to eBird. When you're on this trip, you have no internet access, even when you're on shore at Stanley or on South Georgia. The eh, it's very expensive satellite time, so calls home were very brief, and nobody was checking their phone for text messages or Instagram. So it was not easy to keep up with the e-birding. Okay. And of course, here's what we went for really, the seabirds. Black-browed albatrosses nest here. The macaroni penguin nests here. There's a local cormorant. These are gentoos and a South Polar skua. I'm pretty sure I've got that one right. And more penguins. We had king penguins. Believe it or not, that big brown thing is a chick, which before it has molted looks a lot bigger than the adult. And it was very funny to watch these chick penguins pester the parents to feed me even more. And here's the Magellanics in its ground nesting burrow. We move on to South Georgia as a breeding site. I Right. This is a South Georgia pipit. They have a pipit, the world's southernmost passerine, and it is endemic. If you want to see this bird, this is where you go, which means it doesn't have a place to leave to during the South Georgian winter. It's a real amazing little bird, and the photo on the left is not mine. That's from a rock jumper tour, but the photo on the right is mine. I didn't have the patience to wait to get the perfect shot, just the evidence that I had seen it. And here's the South Georgia pintail, another endemic, in its mucking around, dabbling here among the tussock grass, and a better portrait headshot of the South Georgia pintail. The pintail looks a lot like the yellow-billed teal, but this neck is the giveaway. The neck is paler because, as you can see, the tail on this thing over in the tussock grass doesn't look a heck of a lot like any pintail we see up this way. And here we have the seabirds, the gray-headed albatross. These are giant petrels, and this is a wandering albatross chick. The wandering albatross only breeds every other year. This bird you can see is starting to go into its molt. The chicks are on land about 18 months. And what's not in this picture is the skua that is hanging around. This chick is now way too big for a skua to make lunch out of, but it will hang around. The skua will hang around and eat droppings or anything else that gets spilled when mom and dad come home to feed that chick with very enriched oil. This bird on the top left is a snowy sheathbill, which is kind of a weird seabird. You do find them out at sea, but they are the only seabird that would land on deck with us. I think this bird might actually be sitting on a rail of the ship. They're kind of the crows. They're not a corvid, but they're kind of a scavenger bird. So you find them around expedition huts, and you find them hanging around the penguin colonies, and just kind of a funny bird. I think it might be its own genus, but don't quote me on that. Now, skuas, some of you have been lucky enough to see skuas flying other places, might want to get a size perspective on it. These skuas were very curious and didn't mind walking right up to you. And of course, they are not endangered. So I threw my glove down. That is my mitten. So you can get a sense. It's a nice, good sized ski mitten. You can get a good sense for how big this skua is, because when they're certainly flying around the boat, or when you see them offshore from Cape Hatteras, for instance, it's very hard to get a sense of the size of the skua. And here is a very cute kind of shag. This is the South Georgia shag, much smaller bird, Uh, a lot of these islands, as those of you who've been to the Pacific Islands know, um, they have these very specific endemic variations, subspecies, not true separate species. And this little cutie just stole my heart. So here we are getting to Antarctica. Um, our true Antarctic species, the Adelie penguin, so adorable, right there up on the Antarctic Peninsula. And this was the day that we actually got to set foot on the Antarctic Peninsula. They let us on each for about 2 minutes, and then we had to get off again. So I think that ends my presentation. Uh, sorry didn't really mean to end with quite such a somber note, but it is the wilderness, and you have to get used to seeing um, these carcasses and skulls and so on when you travel to the wilderness of Antarctica. So Donna, that completes my presentation. I hope I didn't go too fast. I have edited and edited to make sure everyone could stay awake while I was talking, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that people